Yeah, we're starting over. So, welcome to The Point with Mick Rich. I'm joined here today with Doug Turner, candidate for New Mexico governor. Doug, great having you on board.
Great to be here. Good to see you. It's been a while.
It has been a while. Doug, before we got on this morning, I kind of looked up and you and I just chatted just a minute or two ago
Mhm.
that this is an old bio, but sometimes the old bios kind of highlight those important parts of your life that you've moved on from and may have forgotten. Not you haven't forgotten them, but one of the things I noticed was that you worked on Steve Forbes' campaign
Mhm.
when he ran for president in 2000.
Yeah.
You've worked on a number. It looks like a number of House U.S. House races, New Mexico State Legislature, other offices, served 3 terms as chairman of the New Mexico Judicial Standards Commission. Uh,
Hmm.
this is all pretty old. And then we go on down, and then it talks about that you got your bachelor's degree from the American University School of International Studies and a
Yeah.
master's in international relations. In that they highlight here the University of Paris, but you had mentioned earlier that was part of which university?
It was the English translation is the Free University of Brussels. It was joint a joint program between a American university and a French university in Belgium. So
Yeah.
it was
So did you have to learn French before you went there to go to school?
I did have to learn quite a bit of French. I'll say that it is imperfect, my French, but at the time it was pretty good.
No, understand that. I'd mentioned that our son-in-law is a commander in the Navy. They said he received a quasi military uh, independent
Hmm.
scholarship, and they're in Lyon, France, and he's getting a master's in political science, and they spent a year in Monterey at the military language school. So,
Sounds awesome.
tell you what, it's fun, it's exciting for them. They get to travel. The goal is to meet the people of Europe and build relationships, and so they're out there. I'm excited, but we're here about you in your candidacy. Uh, we talked a little bit. We crossed paths in 18 when I ran from Senate, and I was well aware at that time that you ran for governor in 2000.
10.
What was it? 10. So what have you done? We talked that's a little bit before,
Hmm.
real quick, before 2010. So what have you done since 2010?
Well, I've got 3 kids. I have a 19-year-old son who's finishing up his freshman year in college. I have 2 daughters, a 16-year-old who will be a senior next year, and a 12-year-old. Um, she'll be going to 7th grade. So I've been pretty busy with my family. Um, I lost my wife to breast cancer a year ago in January, so almost a year and a half ago. So it
Sorry
was
to hear.
a long fight and challenging for our family. Um, and then grown my business. We do work for the Department of War. I think I've mentioned that before. We're a facilities cleared agency, so we hold clearances for our staff up to TS level. We do some work for Special Operations Command in the Southern Hemisphere. We do work for UCOM in Europe. We still are a federal government contractor, in the continental United States, and then we have our state and local corporate and government businesses. So mostly focused on that, and a couple other businesses on the side. Building some custom Land Rovers and things like that. So our
Oh,
headquarters is here in Albuquerque, and we we currently have activities in probably 40 countries. So
Wow.
we've been busy.
You have been busy, and it's not raised. God, I'm so sorry to hear about your wife. That's Marion and I talk about it. How hard, what's worse, going first or going second? And so my heart goes out to you and your family. Uh, and God, what an exciting life. So I've only looked at one job overseas, and that was in Erbil, Iraq. And that was, I somehow I ended up with the task order contract with United Nations Industrial Development Organization. And
That was probably a headache.
well, it was interesting. I knew my wife loved me when she was happy that I didn't get the job in Erbil. Uh, so that, so the little bit that I've done brings into perspective how challenging and what you've overcome to work in as many countries as you have, and then also work with the federal government. Now, my company also had a FOSI, and then we had DOE Q for a while.
Well, we've done DOE, we've done FEMA, we've worked for the Department of Agriculture, we've worked for the Small Business Administration. So, I mean, we have anyone who's familiar with federal contracting, really strong CPARs.
Yeah.
I think one of the challenges of late is there's just been less of it at the federal level, and I think that's probably a result of the Trump administration. I think evaluating the utility of a lot of the contracts that they have out there. And whether they're needed, but that's been a big chunk of our business for a while.
Yeah. So you're running. What made you decide to get into the governor's race? What made you decide I'm going to run for not? And when people say, "Oh, you decided to run for governor," no, that's not the decision. The decision is to be the next governor of New Mexico, and what do you hope to accomplish?
Well, I mean, I do think there's some utility in understanding the motivation. Certainly, for people who are watching your show and voters, we are and this because you've been a candidate yourself. A resource-rich state, whether it's oil and gas, historical resources, cultural, tourism, etc. And yet, on so many of the key metrics that we look at that matter when we look at economic development or the future of this state, we are failing. And I looked at not only my current opponents, but I looked at the Democrats running in the race, and I was honestly quite afraid at one, what we would end up with should either of those Democrats win, and number two, that we didn't have a Republican candidate who could actually raise the money, build the campaign infrastructure and team, and win in November. And I still believe that. I still believe that we will be in bad shape with whichever nominee we end up with. But I also believe that I'm the only one who can actually win this race. I mean, I've outraised everybody combined in an extremely short period of time. I'm the only campaign that's built it with an actual statewide political machine with people. I have over 160 volunteers statewide working on my race. And that's what it's going to take to win. And if you can't raise the money and put together an organization, it doesn't matter how brilliant you are as a candidate, you're just not going to get there.
Understand. So let's say you're governor. You win, you're sworn in. What's the top 3 items that you hope to accomplish as governor in your first term?
Well, number one is finally get some fixes in on our public education system. we are 50th in the nation in public education performance, and we were 50th 30 years ago when I got involved in politics working for Gary Johnson. So, we have to change how we move kids through school. We have to have mandatory requirements that all kids at third grade must read at third grade level before they move to the next class. And if that means they have to be held back or have some kind of summer remediation program, so be it. But right now, over 47% of our kids leaving third grade don't have those basic skills. So we're failing them. I am an advocate of school choice, and I think we need to have more school choice in public education system. I spent 15 years as chairman of the board for the Public Charter Schools of New Mexico advocacy group. So we're the largest school choice advocacy organization in the state. And parents and kids deserve to have options if traditional public schools are failing them, and they don't today.
Doug, if I could chime in here, amen to that about charter schools. I was the founding member of the Albuquerque Vocational Charter High School. That was the first vocational high school charter in Albuquerque. And the challenge of getting APS to sign off on that was huge. We're building a couple charter schools right now. I believe that is the charter schools provide a great alternate. The other thing I want to bring up here about education is the state is in the process of building a K through 12 school in Northeast New Mexico for 50 students, and they spent $45 million.
Mm-hmm.
And in 5 years, we both know that the number of students is going to decrease from that 50. And we see that across the board. In Albuquerque, we see them building Taj Mahals that, private businesses can't. And they spend the money, $1,000 per square foot for school construction. Unreal to me. So I like to see that reined in.
Yeah. Well, I agree with that. I'll just give you a couple of other things I'd like to see get done in a first term. I'd like to see us move to reduce our personal income tax probably by about 50%. So it ends up being around 3 versus 6 is what it is now. So we can at least be competitive with our surrounding states. Texas is 0, Arizona's 2.5. Colorado's 3. So, if we're looking to be competitive, for business to come here, we need to deal with that issue. And we also have to deal with our terrible gross receipts tax situation. We have extremely high gross receipts tax, and we're the 8th highest tax burden state in the nation right now. And gross receipts taxes are very, very regressive. They really hit the people that can at least afford them. So I'd like to see that go away. I'd argue that realistically, so you can not overburden municipalities that rely on those taxes, I'd suggest that's going to take 2 terms, but I think we can get that done.
So that's 2.
And then I think we need 2 more things, honestly. So I'm going to give you 4. I think we need an economic development department that actually focuses on the interests and needs of small businesses. We don't really do that. We're looking for big deals all the time. And I think if we create an environment that allows, 10,000 small businesses to hire 1 person each, we have real job growth in the state. It is important to find these big companies to move here, but it's equally as important to make all the tools that the state has created over the years available to small businesses and in an easy way. It's very, very difficult to access a lot of these things. Whether it's JTIP or LIDA or even getting a bond, I've done IRBs for my own project, and it's you want to put a power drill through your head. It's such a pain in the neck. That needs to be made easier. And lastly, we have got to deal with our CYFD agency. It is failing our children. It's, I think contributing to juvenile crime and long-term crime problems when we have, kids that grow up in a broken home that's ultimately created by the state. And we have not addressed that as at a state level ever. Like, there's no governor who said, I'm going to take full responsibility for this organization and I'm going to fix it. And, there's been all of these hot potato blue ribbon commissions, and maybe we should create a new entity that manages this. And I think that's completely wrongheaded. I think it's something the governor can fix, and that's something that would definitely be on my agenda.
One of the things my wife and I, when we go through the paper in the morning, we talk about CYFD, and we're looking at saying that the number of kids that have died,
I know.
right, and I'm thinking, if I had that record with my staff, I would be facing manslaughter charges. The state would come after me, and I see this. And this to me is horrendous. And to tie in, and I think this is about overall child welfare. It is appalling to me that we have more abortion clinics than we have birthing centers.
Yeah.
And that is the priority of the state.
Well, unfortunately, it is an unfortunate sort of these law of unintended consequences. You overturn Roe v. Wade, and we turn New Mexico into a abortion tourism state. So I agree with you, and that it's not something the state needs to be funding. There are lots and lots of other programs out there to support young mothers, and I think we need to support them. I mean, I know Catholic Health Initiatives, I think they've renamed themselves, but years ago, they had, some really important programs out there, and we need to be getting behind that kind of work.
And I agree. My thoughts on this are, when we talk about our young people, when the state has such an emphasis on abortion, it's an unintended consequence, is that you get the impression is that a pregnancy is a problem, and we need to deal with it the same way we deal with our children. And we need to look at our children as treasures, not something to be dealt with. And
well, I mean, I generally think that the state has failed our children for a very, very long time. And if we want to be thinking about an environment where we have business growth and economic growth, and we reduce crime, we need to start with our kids. And we need to start making sure that they're in safe homes and they get a good education, and we don't keep repeating these cycles where kids are in bad homes, or they get a bad education, and then when they ultimately have children, their children are in the same situation. So we need to throw the kitchen sink at this problem, because you're in business, I'm in business, and finding good people is really, really hard. And if we don't start young, making sure that people are in stable homes and safe families and get a good education, we're not gonna change these outcomes.
But I agree with that. So we've covered those 4 items. We haven't talked about crime. Just from the standpoint of my business, I've had our tandem dunk truck stolen. We've had trailers stolen. We've had skid steers stolen. We've had our buildings that we're constructing broken into. And
I've been in the same boat on my projects.
And our police department is nothing more APD, and I'm not just saying APD, it's also the state police. They are just the first step in the insurance industry. Is you need to get them to file the paperwork so you can then push the paperwork off to the insurance company. That's one. The other one is that we talk about uh, shortages of doctors. Our daughter was last year UNM med school, and she had a home invasion.
Mm-hmm.
And she's now in Pennsylvania at U of Penn. She's never coming back to Albuquerque. Her roommate, who is also in radiology, she's never coming back to Albuquerque. My daughter was did a rotation in the emergency department because she was also a surgical PA before med school. There was 11 shootings one night in Albuquerque. My daughter was working the rotation in the emergency department, and she said it was a military trauma. You're doing this, you're looking at somebody, you go, pray for this one, send this one in. She said that, and so we're looking at this, and we're saying we need doctors, but they have to do rotations in all the different departments. They get to see just the worst of Albuquerque, of New Mexico, and we're saying, why don't they stay? Well, they see we've got crime, violent crime, we've got educational challenges, and you start to go through the malpractice, all of these things, and they say, I want to go live somewhere that values life. It's not Albuquerque. So when we talk about crime, what's your thoughts about turning crime around?
Well, we have some real, I think, structural problems in the in the criminal side. I mean, we have we had this 2016 Bail Reform Act, which created this effectively a revolving door, a cashless bail system. If you go around the state, anywhere you go, you have sheriffs who tell you that they keep arresting the same people over and over and over again, which is infuriating, and that's not what we want, and that is the result of judges having the authority to let people out before they are tried and convicted. And so what's going to have to happen there is we're going to have to go back to the voters and change that. I think the initial intent was probably it was probably well intended. We don't want people who've been busted for very minor things to get stuck in jail and be a burden to the system. But the actual outcome is we tend to put people out on the street who are actually have no business being out on the street. So that's number one. From a juvenile crime perspective, I think we have to have much, much earlier interventions with children and families. We need to, work harder to keep kids off of drugs. I think we need to work harder to provide, strong mental health services to these kids. People say, well, we need stronger penalties. Well, I promise you, there is no criminal who's going to commit a crime who's worried about the penalty. I mean, most of them don't think they're actually going to get caught. So I don't think that's the right path. But I do think, when you look at juvenile justice, that some of these kids are bad apples, unfortunately. And while we want to rehabilitate them, we also should not be treating them with kid gloves. And a lot of them deserve to have, penalties, commensurate with adult penalties. So, that's kind of my thought.
Okay. You're the first one that I've heard mentioned about revisiting the bail bond system.
Mm-hmm.
This was probably in 19, I think it was 19. I was with Eddie Aragon.
Yep.
And he and I went over and saw the video clip over at Imbibe when Jackson Weller, the UNM baseball player, was executed out on the street by Darian Besher, who's now behind bars for that. He was out. He had been arrested for, if I remember correctly, for shooting an individual. And then the person that he shot wouldn't testify against him. He was caught for shooting from a vehicle, which is what we call a drive-by shooting.
Mm-hmm.
The judge let him out. And while this happened, he went and shot and killed Jackson Weller. Why? Because he figured he'd never serve time. And you see this. In New Mexico, we have people that believe, and rightly so, because the system has taught them, you're not going to serve time for whatever crime you commit. And that's got to change. The other one is I gave a guy a lift down to the train station that was going to go to the VA in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
And I went and bought him breakfast because he hadn't had anything to eat. And then when we're talking, I said, "What brought you to Albuquerque? Where are you from?" And he said, "Well, I was in California and they had 3 strikes and you're out." And he goes, "I had 2 felonies." He said, "I just couldn't take the pressure of not getting a 3rd felony. So I left California, came to New Mexico." These things have to change. If we're
They absolutely do. They absolutely do. I'm not sure you heard about this, but about a month and a half ago, I was walking my dogs at a park near my home here in Albuquerque. And a guy was coming down the street towards me on a little moped, like a Vespa. A car cut him off, and so he shouted at the car, and then they passed me. I was actually talking to our Republican city councilor, Dan Lewis, at the time. And I heard this pop, and I wasn't thinking much about it, but the guy turned around and was sort of coming back towards me, and he was totally dazed and in shock. And he said, "Dude, I've been shot." And I just didn't believe this. I was like, "What?" And he got closer to me, and he had blood started coming, pouring out of him, right? And so what had happened was the guy the dude in the car who had cut him off didn't like the fact that he shouted at him, and pulled a gun and shot him out the window. Shot out of the window of the car. Now, the guy ended up being okay. He was hospitalized, and paramedics and so forth came. But the detectives or some of the law enforcement officers that I had spoken with were telling me that it's likely that this wasn't the first time that this had happened. Right? Just insane.
So for you're tuning in and listening to this, this lawlessness.
Mm-hmm.
We like to, and there was a little saying here in New Mexico, "Don't bag it, brag it." And I'm saying that doesn't solve the problems. I was talking to an architect, and she was telling me that they were meeting with the developer out of Phoenix, out on the west side, looking at a 5-10 acre site to develop 30, 40, 50 million. Maybe that's a little high, but they're looking to develop the property. And as they're discussing, we're going to put this over here and this over here, and they're talking about the vision for the property, a gentleman stumbled into their group who had been gut shot. And
Crazy.
Then down on the ground, they called 911. They're getting the ambulance there. Nobody knew how to treat this individual, what to do. They're doing the best they can with limited resources they had. The ambulance came, the police came, everything kind of settled out. And the developers looked at her and her team and said, "We're done and we're never coming back."
Yeah.
This is what's happening in our state. Just recently, and I'm sure you read this, the state has spent $500-600 million in incentives to bring companies here. And those incentives are to make up for our schools, to make up for the crime, make up for all the shortcomings, the taxes. And we've got almost nothing in return for that $600 million. Doug, I'm looking, if you're elected, I'm looking for you to turn it around. And then lastly, the last question I have for you. I remember when I ran for 18, and our pollster mentioned to me, he said, Mick, the Republican governor ends up being a de facto head of the Republican Party. So here we are. Your governor, you know what the Republican Party is. We're all splintered. We're all going in different directions. We're all pointing our finger. What are your thoughts? How do we bring Republicans together?
Well, it's a great point, Mick. You know, one of the things that I have talked about while I've been traveling around the state is the need to bring our party together. You know, we've taken some knocks over the last few years. You know, we have not had a great winning streak on our legislative races, and you know, we don't have a, you know, the sort of leader of the party does need to be the governor. And so what I've been telling people is I'm committed to supporting the Republican Party as it seeks to take back seats. I'm committed to supporting the party and candidates as they raise money, candidate recruitment, candidate training. You know, when I was working, you know, for Johnson, we had a really good machine. You know, we built a farm team, lots of young people, which is really where I came out of. And we need to do that again. I mean, there's some fracture right now. I think we need to come up with a path for everybody to get on the same page. And that only happens if you have a governor driving that operation. So that's definitely something that I've committed to do. You know, we may not completely take back the legislature and make this state red, but we sure as hell can do a better job at electing, you know, more Republicans in more districts. And it requires logistics, it requires a political operation, it requires money, and the governor needs to be part of that.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. What I noticed is the different factions, they said, we need to unite. They said, that's right. The other guys need to get behind us. What we need to do is we need to come to the center, not just one direction or the other. So, yeah. Doug, we need to wrap it up for our listeners. So how do they reach out to you? What's your campaign address?
Sure. So the campaign is Turner for, that's FORNM.com, Turner4NM.com. And from there, people can sign up to volunteer, they can contribute, and they can reach the campaign. And we've got a great team. So, you know, we've got new polling. It shows us on a winning trajectory here. And, you know, I think we're going to win this. So everybody needs to get on board early. You know, we've got a final fundraising push. We have a report due, I think it's tomorrow or Friday, which is our last reporting period. It'll show us having raised yet another couple $100,000. And, you know, it's all good. Just get on board.
Doug, great having you on. Wish you the very best coming up on Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mick. Good to see you. I like the beard.
Oh, thank you.